What is your role in the studio? And by the studio, let's discuss. I mean, like commercial studios, traditional commercial studios. And what are the roles? While we kind of touch on this, I want to share a really fun story. It's a funny story to me from an experience I had on staff at a commercial studio. So for context of this story, I got a job at one of the coolest commercial studios in Los Angeles when I was 20 years old. I moved to Los Angeles with this naive dream of I'm going to work in the studio business. I was a no one. I mean, in the music world, I was just some kid from the middle of nowhere in Illinois and had a recording experience in my house, in my home studio as a high schooler, recording bands and myself and friends and things like that. I had decided that I was going to go just move to California, go to some recording trade school, and then just try and get a gig in a studio. This is common. I talk to a lot of people who want to do this. And unfortunately, I've become a bit more pessimistic on doing this. But to be fair, I did do this. Like, it happened and it paid off and worked out. So with that being said, I have sort of conflicting feelings on the topic. But in this story, I was a 19-year-old. I moved out for the first time, right? I moved to Los Angeles, Hollywood specifically. Literally picked an apartment on Hollywood Boulevard. I got a piece of hair here that's going to drive me nuts. There we go. And it was a studio apartment. I was going to be sharing it with some roommate from the school, some dude I'd never met. And I was going to be going to this recording program. And frankly, I was pumped because the only thing that I cared about and was interested in was recording music. I just thought it was so fun. Anyway, I go to this recording program. The school is called Musicians Institute, by the way. They have a recording program. I did like the shortest possible program. It was just the audio engineering. It was 6 months long. And then I didn't get a degree in anything. I just got a certificate. You know, you went over whatever the curriculum was for that. It was good curriculum. Connected a lot of dots for me. And after that, I got a job at a studio. Now, how did I get a job? Well, one, I did an internship when I was in school. And then when I graduated, I had already reached out to studios and applied, right? I sent my resume to a ton of studios, probably more than 20 or 30 studios in California, just not knowing what was going to happen and seeing what responses I got. And hilariously, I got 2 responses out of all the emails I sent. And one of them just happened to be the studio called East West. Now, a fun thing about East West is it's actually a studio that had been around for decades. It was financed and built by Frank Sinatra, Bing Crosby, and Bill Putnam. I'm sure some of you have heard of Sinatra and Crosby. Bill Putnam's a big influence in the recording studio and audio engineering world. Founder of Universal Audio, invented a lot of the compressors and gear that we love and cherish and still use today, literally. Anyway, he was the designer of this place. So I say that just to tell you the significance of this studio. I walked in for the interview. I couldn't believe this place. It was like, it felt like a glitch in the Matrix that I even got to go there. So anyway, I interviewed. I get a job as a runner. What is a runner, right? So this is the conversation about like roles in recording studios. At that position, a runner is essentially a paid intern. Like, your job is to not be in the studio on the session. Your job is to work for the studio, doing stuff for the studio, right? So errands, cleaning up, stocking things, moving cars, like managing things, going and getting food for clients, things like that. Essentially, you've got to like prove your competence as a runner and that you are committed to what you're doing and able to handle simple things like a food order before they trust you in a room with a super high paying client. And in this studio, it was mostly very high paying clients who were like A-list artists. I mean, the Chili Peppers were in there when I interviewed. And then like every other session was either a big string session for a movie, or it was like a big rock band or a big hip hop artist or just a big solo artist. That's the kind of studio this place was. So that's the context. My job was a runner And a cool thing happens after you've been a runner for a while and you've demonstrated you are somewhat competent and you can be helpful to the assistant engineer. So this is another very important role. Assistant engineer is essentially an engineer on staff at the studio. And the assistant engineer's job is essentially the main person interfacing with the client in the room on the session for the entirety of the session. You get there before the client, you leave after they leave. You make sure that everything they need, they have. But your job is to also interface with the studio staff, mainly receptionists and runners, right? So I was a runner, and then occasionally when working with these runners, you find one or two of them that you can really trust, who's kind of goes above and beyond the rest of them, and you can ask for them to be around on the session, right? So this was something we called a third engineer, an assistant to the assistant, if you will. So I found myself doing a lot of thirding on sessions, and it was like the coolest thing at the time. I was just super grateful. This involved doing a lot of the setups for the session. And what that means is you get all the information for the session before the session actually starts. All the mics they want to use, all of the equipment that they need for the session, the setup info, where it's going to go, how it's all organized. You know, there's a lot of details in the setup, and it's extremely important that the setup is done before the client even walks in the room. So this is how a studio like this runs. Now, this story I'm getting to was I was the third. My friend Brendan was the assistant on the session, and I'm going to not say the name of the client, but it was a prog rock band, a very successful, significant prog rock band of all big time players. Okay. And the producer, I can say the name of the producer, Alan Parsons. Alan Parsons, very successful producer, musician, just very successful, talented, very nice guy. So we get the setup from the producer. This is another hierarchy thing where on most sessions, the producer is the boss, right? They're essentially the lead contractor of the job site, which is the recording session, right? So we get this session set up from Alan, and we're doing the whole thing to tape. So, there's 24 channels on the tape machine. You generally get like 22 tracks out of those because you got to leave a couple tracks open, right? So the first 22 are everything for the whole record, right? And this is a band that's got drums, guitars. Okay, I'm just going to say it. The artist was Steve Wilson, so very successful prog rock project. Anyway, Alan's producing this. We get the session set up from him, right? It's a very simple setup, which is cool. And from a lot of different directions here, right? You got to essentially make very competent decisions on this. So Alan was, I guess you would say, producing and engineering this, right? So he picked out all the mics, the inputs, console, channels, everything that's going to be used on the session. So my job was to get this session set up for the thing, right? So running all the lines, running all the mics, getting everything organized, clean, set up, tested, ready, labeled, the whole deal. Again, as a runner or a third. So we get it all done. And part of the setup was electric guitar. Steve Wilson's a guitar player. We had cabs and it was actually an inactive reverb chamber that we would use for guitar amps. Like if we needed more isolation, it was technically not in the studio. It was across this like load-in zone. I want to say it was like a 57. One mic. Very simple for whatever that was happening in there was, right? So we get it all set up. It's all ready to go. Tape machine. There's a lot of prep that goes into a session like this. And it's got to all be tested. And when you get all your tracks laid out on the console, changing things can be a bit of a pain in the butt and kind of mess everything up. This is probably, by the way, why I'm so obsessed with studio setups and workflow and things like that, is because of these years doing this. Anyway, so it's all set up, really pumped, feeling that like relief, but Alan is not there yet. The band is there. Steve shows up, the artist. We're showing him around, and I take him into the room where the guitar amps are, and he's just instantly, this is not going to work. We're going to have a few cabs. We're going to be switching, and we need to mic all of them up. We need to use 57, a 121, a 421. We're going to need that on every cab, and it's got to be ready to go. So now I'm in this pickle where I got the setup from the producer. I'm also understanding like all the details and logistics of like the busing and everything going to the guitar track and things like that. And I go, well, what do I do here? Because I'm also talking to Steve, right? So And I've got to be professional, and I've got to like not screw up my instructions, but I need to sort of accommodate for what he is wanting, right? So I get a couple of the runners, we just get the mics that he said, which was 3 mics per cab, right? It's a lot. We get the mics on stands, coil up some XLRs with them, but I did not have them connect it yet because I need to talk to the producer who was not there, right? So everything was ready before the artist got there. Artist got there, decided he wanted to have 9 mics on guitar amp. Then Alan shows up, right? A very commanding figure. Very, very nice. Very professional. Also comes in, looks you dead in the eyes, introduces himself, goes around to every single person. I love people like this. Gives you the attention, learns your name. So I'm do the same thing with Alan. I'm walking him around, showing him the setup. We get to this guitar booth, right? And there's a lot more mics in there than what he asked for. And I'm telling him, so I have this set up exactly how you asked for it to be set up. And Steven said that he wanted to have some more mics. So I wasn't sure if I should run them. We have all the mics here. They're ready to go. So if you want me to run them, just tell me how you want to do it and we'll get it going for you. And he just kind of looks at it and like nods his head. And he just says, no, this is perfect. Let's just leave it like this. And I laugh, chuckled, but professionally. I didn't, make a whole thing out of it. But I was like, oh, okay. We'll just leave the mics generally sitting in front of the cabs. And lo and behold, Steven never asked another question about it. Later in the session, they're getting sounds, and he loved how everything sounds and just used the one mic that the producer asked for. And that was a cool learning experience about the role of the producer and everything with everyone else too, right? Because I'm sort of seeing this from the runner's perspective, the assistant engineer, and then the producer and artist perspective. Like the artists in a lot of cases, not just this particular one, but they have opinions on things and they'll want to do things their way. If there's a producer, pretty much 100% of the time, the producer is the boss and they are sort of like the ultimate authority on what's going to happen. They're in charge of the budget, they're in charge of the time, and they booked the studio time generally. So we're going to be interfacing with the producer. And that's their role too, right? Is to interface with the studio to accommodate what is best for the artist. And in this case, tracking a big project to tape. So I just wanted to share. I think that's such a fun experience. And I got to have experiences like this all the time, every single day with different sessions and producers and artists where there's these little dynamics that you witness and little exchanges and things that are very, very important and at any point could go horribly wrong. I could have just said something really stupid. I watched a lot of interns and runners say very stupid things that ultimately led to them losing their jobs. I could have said like, no, the producer, I'm not going to, I could have said any number of dumb things. But in that case, I needed to sort of be like, oh, okay, well, you know what? We'll get the mics and we'll figure it out. A-okay, right? And I just loved it. I loved how Alan handled it. He's like, no, it's all good. Just leave them how they are. And we'll just, we'll do it how it is. He had confidence in what he was doing, made the right call. Steven loved the guitar sound. Another thing that I remember from that session is the drummer had this crazy, huge, complex drum setup, and the mic setup for the drum kit was like very straightforward. Like one mic on snare. I think there was like a mono room mic in front of the kit. Like it was very simple setup, not just those 2 mics, but a lot of guys will put 2 mics on the top and 1 on the bottom and just like 3, 4 overheads, crazy stuff. So I really appreciated on that particular session how Alan went about doing it. So anyway, I just wanted to shed a little bit of light on a story from that time of my career and my life that kind of demonstrates a little bit of the different roles in the studio. And if you've thought about working in a commercial studio, this is like not a big topic that there's a lot of information on. So I hope you liked that story. If you do, then maybe I'll do some more videos like this where I share some other stories. It's fun to talk about it. I actually remembered this because I found footage from the session. I was like, I remember all of this. And then I saw a little clip of me with my long hair and young self. Like, God, it was like 11 years ago at this point. And it's so funny. I forget about all of those things. And sometimes it takes seeing a video or photos from that session to remind me of those different moments. But there's a lot of value in every single session that we had. And yeah, I just want to share it with you. Also, a great opportunity for me to plug my course, which I have on the roles of the recording studio, where I kind of go through all of the different jobs that there are available in commercial studios, you know, depending on which studio you're applying to or hoping to work at, or what job you're looking to fill. There's actually a lot of different roles that are available in commercial studios for the ones that are still going. So if you're interested in learning more about those, check out the Roles of the Recording Studio course down below. It's a mini video course. It's not super long, but it does kind of break down those different categories. Not an expensive course, not a long thing to sit through, but you know, it's a great way to support this channel. So if you're thinking about working in a studio, go pick that up. Subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you in the next one.